The Arizona sun hung like a merciless orange eye above the endless expanse of red earth and scrub brush. Tom Mackenzie wiped the sweat from his brow with a calloused hand, his green eyes scanning the horizon as he guided his horse, Thunder, back toward his modest ranch. The year was 1878, and tensions between settlers and Apache tribes had reached a boiling point that made every journey beyond town limits a calculated risk. At 28, Tom had learned to read the land like scripture, every bent branch, every disturbed stone, every silence where birdsong should be, all told stories of who had passed and when. That's why the ravens circling ahead caught his attention. Ravens were scavengers, and in Apache territory, circling ravens usually meant trouble. He urged Thunder into a careful trot, his hand instinctively checking the Colt 45 at his hip. The weapon felt cold and heavy, a reminder of the harsh realities of frontier life. As they crested a small rise, Tom's breath caught in his throat. Below, partially hidden by a cluster of prickly pear cacti, lay a figure sprawled motionless on the dusty ground. Even from a distance, Tom could see the distinctive leather clothing and long black hair that marked the man as Apache. A dark stain spread across the earth beneath him. Blood, still wet enough to glisten in the afternoon sun. Tom's first instinct was to ride away. Every settler in Cedar Ridge had been warned about Apache war parties. These were Cochise's lands, and the great chief's warriors showed no mercy to white men found in their territory. But as Tom watched, the figure stirred slightly, a barely perceptible movement that spoke of life clinging desperately to a failing body. "Damn," Tom muttered under his breath, his conscience warring with common sense. He dismounted slowly, ground-tying Thunder with the practiced ease of a man who'd spent more years in the saddle than on foot. His boots crunched softly on the gravelly soil as he approached the wounded Apache, every nerve alert for the possibility of an ambush. The warrior was young, perhaps 25, with the lean, muscular build of a hunter. A bullet had torn through his left shoulder, leaving his buckskin shirt soaked with blood. His breathing was shallow and labored, and his bronze skin had taken on a pale, waxy sheen that Tom recognized as the precursor to death. What struck Tom most powerfully were the man's eyes. When they fluttered open, they held no fear, no pleading, only a dignified acceptance of whatever fate awaited him. In those dark depths, Tom saw something that reminded him of his own father, a man who had faced death with quiet courage during the cholera outbreak of 1867. "Water," the Apache whispered in accented but clear English, his voice barely audible. Tom glanced around nervously. The smart thing would be to mount Thunder and ride hard for Cedar Ridge, report the wounded Apache to Sheriff Bradford and let the military handle it. But as he looked down at the dying man, Tom found himself remembering his father's words. "Son, the measure of a man isn't what he takes from this world, but what he's willing to give when it costs him everything." "Jesus help me," Tom breathed, making his decision. He retrieved his canteen and knelt beside the wounded warrior, carefully lifting the man's head to give him water. The Apache drank gratefully, some color returning to his lips. "You're hurt bad," Tom said softly. "That bullet needs to come out, and you've lost a lot of blood." The Apache studied Tom's face with surprising intensity. "You are Mackenzie," he said, his pronunciation careful and deliberate. "The one who trades fairly with my people." Tom was startled. He'd never seen this particular Apache before, yet somehow the man knew him. It was true that Tom had occasionally traded horses and supplies with peaceful Apache bands, treating them with the same respect he'd show any customer. Most settlers considered this borderline treason, but Tom's father had taught him that honor didn't depend on the color of a man's skin. "How do you know my name? Word travels far in the desert. You are known as one who speaks truth." The Apache winced as pain shot through his shoulder. "I am Nalnish, son of Cochise." Tom's blood turned to ice water. Cochise, the most feared Apache chief in the territory, the man whose very name could empty a saloon in seconds, and this was his son, bleeding to death on Tom's land. "Cochise is your father." Tom's voice came out as a croak. Nalnish nodded weakly. "I was scouting. Soldiers found me. I escaped, but—" He gestured helplessly at his wound. Tom's mind raced. If Nalnish died here, and if Cochise discovered his son's body on Mackenzie land, the chief's vengeance would be swift and terrible, not just against Tom, but against all of Cedar Ridge. Women and children would pay the price for one Apache's death, regardless of Tom's innocence in the matter. But more than fear motivated Tom's next words. Looking at Nalnish, he didn't see a savage or an enemy. He saw a young man far from home, wounded and facing death with remarkable courage. He saw someone's son, just as Tom had once been someone's son. "Can you ride?" Tom asked. Nalnish attempted to sit up, then fell back with a gasp of pain. "No, the bleeding, too much." Tom made his decision with the same quick certainty that had served him well in cattle drives and horse breaking. "I'm going to help you onto my horse. My ranch isn't far. I can tend that wound properly." Why?" Nalnish's eyes searched Tom's face. "Your people and mine, we are enemies." Tom was quiet for a long moment, listening to the wind whisper through the sagebrush. "Because it's the right thing to do, and because no man should die alone in the dust like an animal." With considerable effort and no small amount of pain for Nalnish, Tom managed to get the wounded Apache onto Thunder's back. He walked alongside, steadying his unexpected passenger as they made their way toward the ranch buildings that shimmered in the distance like a mirage. The Mackenzie spread was modest: a two-room adobe house, a small barn, and a corral that currently held 6 horses. Tom's late father had built it with his own hands, clearing the land one stone at a time. It wasn't much, but it was home, and it represented everything Tom valued: honest work, simple living, and the freedom to make his own choices. As they reached the barn, Tom helped Nalnish down from the horse and into the cool shadows inside. He quickly prepared a bed of hay covered with old blankets, then examined the wound more carefully by lamplight. "The bullet went clean through," Tom announced with relief. "That's good, nothing to dig out. But you've lost a lot of blood, and this needs proper cleaning." He worked with the careful precision of a man who doctored injured animals and occasionally injured cowboys. Using whiskey to clean the wound and strips of clean cloth for bandages, Tom managed to stop the bleeding and dress the injury properly. Throughout the process, Nalnish remained stoically silent, though his jaw muscles stood out in sharp relief as he fought the pain. "You have steady hands," Nalnish observed when Tom finished. "You have done this before." "Cattle ranching isn't exactly a safe profession," Tom replied, settling back on his heels. "Neither is being Apache, I imagine." For the first time, Nalnish almost smiled. "No, it is not." As evening shadows lengthened across the desert floor, Tom brought food and water to his unlikely patient. They ate in companionable silence, 2 men from different worlds finding unexpected common ground in shared humanity. "Your father," Tom said eventually, "what will he do when you don't return?" Nalnish was quiet for so long that Tom thought he might have fallen asleep. When he finally spoke, his voice carried the weight of prophecy. "He will come looking, with many warriors. They will search every canyon, every waterhole, every settler's claim." He met Tom's eyes directly. "They will find me. And when they do, that depends on whether I'm alive or dead, and on the manner of my treatment." Tom understood the implication. If Cochise found his son's body, especially if it showed signs of torture or abuse, the chief's revenge would be legendary in its scope and brutality. But if Nalnish lived, how long before they start searching? "I should have returned yesterday." "They will begin looking tomorrow, perhaps sooner." Tom nodded grimly. Tomorrow would bring a reckoning he couldn't avoid. He'd made his choice, and now he would have to live with the consequences, however long that might be. As full darkness settled over the Arizona desert, Tom bedded down in the barn near his patient. Sleep came fitfully, punctuated by dreams of war paint and burning buildings. In those dreams, he heard the thundering hoofbeats of 300 Apache warriors riding hard toward Cedar Ridge, their war cries echoing across the endless sky. What Tom didn't know was that those dreams were about to become reality. Dawn broke gray and cold over Cedar Ridge, Arizona territory. The town's 150 souls were already stirring to life, shopkeepers sweeping their boardwalks, the blacksmith firing up his forge, and Sheriff John Bradford making his morning rounds with the measured pace of a man who'd seen too much violence to be hurried by anything less than gunfire. 5 miles east of town, Tom Mackenzie woke to find Nalnish burning with fever. The Apache warrior's dark skin was flushed and hot to the touch, and when Tom checked the bandages, he found them soaked with blood and infection. "Damn," Tom muttered, recognizing the telltale signs of blood poisoning. Without proper medicine, Nalnish could die within days, maybe hours. "The fever dreams have started," Nalnish whispered, his voice thick and disoriented. "I see my father riding with the spirits of dead warriors. They are coming, Mackenzie. So many." Like thunder across the sky, Tom pressed a cool, damp cloth to the Apache's burning forehead. "You're delirious. Save your strength." But even as he spoke, Tom felt a chill that had nothing to do with the morning air. Something was wrong, not just with Nalnish, but with the world itself. The normal sounds of desert life were absent, no bird calls, no rustle of small animals in the brush. Even the wind had stilled to an unnatural calm. Thunder, normally calm as his name suggested, stood rigid in the corral with his ears pricked forward, staring intently toward the eastern hills. The other horses had gathered around him, all facing the same direction, with an alertness that spoke of danger only they could sense. Tom climbed to the roof of his barn and pulled out his father's old spyglass. What he saw through the brass tube made his blood freeze. Movement on the distant ridgelines. Not the random motion of wildlife, but the deliberate, coordinated movement of men on horseback, dozens of them, spreading across the hills like shadows given form. As Tom watched, more riders appeared. 50, then 100, then so many he lost count. They moved with the fluid precision of a military unit, but these weren't soldiers. Even at this distance, Tom could make out the distinctive silhouettes of Apache warriors, their horses decorated with war paint, feathers flowing from their hair in the morning breeze. "Jesus Christ," Tom breathed, lowering the spyglass with shaking hands. He climbed down and checked on Nalnish, who was mumbling feverishly in Apache. Tom caught only fragments he could understand. Father, honor, blood debt. But the tone was urgent, almost pleading. Tom made his decision quickly. He saddled Thunder and rode hard for Cedar Ridge, pushing the horse to its limits across the rough terrain. The town needed warning, and Nalnish needed medical attention that Tom couldn't provide. Cedar Ridge dozed peacefully in the morning sun, as Tom thundered down Main Street, his horse's hooves throwing up clouds of dust. People stopped their morning activities to stare as he pulled up in front of the sheriff's office, Thunder lathered with sweat and breathing hard. Sheriff Bradford emerged from the jailhouse, coffee cup in hand and a look of mild annoyance on his weathered face. At 45, John Bradford had been keeping the peace in Cedar Ridge for 8 years, and he'd learned to read trouble in a man's face. What he saw in Tom Mackenzie's expression made him set down his coffee very carefully. "Tom, what's got you riding like the devil himself is on your tail?" "Apache," Tom said simply, swinging down from the saddle. "Hundreds of them, on the eastern ridges." Bradford's expression shifted from annoyance to sharp attention. "How many is hundreds?" "More than I could count. 300, maybe more. They're spreading out, surrounding the town." "You're certain they're Apache?" "Dead certain." And John? Tom hesitated, knowing his next words would change everything. I think they're Cochise's men. The sheriff's face went pale beneath his perpetual sunburn. Cochise. Tom, Cochise has been at peace for 2 years. Why would he? Bradford stopped, studying Tom's expression more carefully. What aren't you telling me? Tom took a deep breath, knowing there was no turning back. Because his son is in my barn, wounded, and running a fever that might kill him. The silence that followed was deafening. Sheriff Bradford stared at Tom as if he'd grown a second head, his mind struggling to process what he'd just heard. You're telling me, Bradford said slowly, that you have Cochise's son hidden on your property. I found him yesterday, shot and bleeding. I couldn't just let him die. Jesus, Mary, and Joseph. Bradford sank into a chair on the boardwalk, his face ashen. Tom, do you have any idea what you've done? If Cochise thinks we've harmed his boy, that's why I'm here. Nalnish needs a doctor, and the town needs to know what's coming. By now, a crowd had gathered. Mary Sullivan emerged from her tavern, wiping her hands on her apron, her red hair catching the morning light. Reverend Ezekiel Hayes appeared from the direction of the church, his black suit making him look like a crow among peacocks. Dr. Samuel Wright pushed through the crowd, his medical bag in hand. What's this about Apache? Mary asked, her Irish accent thickening with worry. Bradford stood slowly, the weight of leadership settling on his shoulders like a lead blanket. Tom found Cochise's son wounded on his land. He's been hiding him since yesterday. The crowd erupted in shocked murmurs and angry shouts. Are you insane? Dr. Wright's face was flushed with indignation. You've doomed us all. Hang him! Someone shouted from the back of the crowd. String him up before Cochise gets here. Enough! Sheriff Bradford's voice cut through the chaos like a whip crack. Nobody's hanging anybody. Tom, you need to take me to this Apache boy. Now. He needs medical attention, Tom said, looking directly at Dr. Wright. Blood poisoning. He might not survive without treatment. Dr. Wright, a thin man in his 50s with nervous hands and kind eyes, looked torn between professional duty and survival instinct. I can't. Treating an Apache during wartime, it's treason. It's medicine, Reverend Hayes said quietly, stepping forward. The elderly minister's voice carried the authority of absolute moral conviction. The Hippocratic Oath doesn't specify the race of patients, doctor, nor does Christian charity. As the crowd argued, a young boy came running down Main Street, his bare feet pounding the dust. Sheriff! Sheriff Bradford! There's riders on Miller's Ridge! Hundreds of 'em! Bradford climbed onto a wooden crate so the entire crowd could see him. Listen to me, all of you. We have perhaps an hour before those Apache reach town. We can panic, or we can handle this like civilized human beings. What do you propose? Mary Sullivan asked, her voice steady, despite the fear in her green eyes. Dr. Wright, you're coming with us to treat the Apache boy. Reverend Hayes, I want you there too, for moral support and as a witness to our intentions. Mary, get word to every family in town. Have them gather what they need and come to the church. Stone walls, and it's the biggest building we have. And if Cochise wants blood? Someone called out. Bradford's hand moved to rest on his gun butt. Then we'll give him justice instead. But first, we try diplomacy. As the crowd dispersed to spread the word and gather their families, Tom found himself face to face with Captain James Morrison, the local military commander. Morrison was a career soldier, 41 years old, with the rigid bearing of a man who'd spent his adult life taking and giving orders. Mackenzie, Morrison said, his voice clipped with military precision, you may have just started a war. Or prevented one, Tom replied. Depends on how we handle the next few hours. I have 30 men in the garrison. Against 300 Apache warriors, that's not much. Then we'd better hope diplomacy works. The ride back to Tom's ranch was tense. The small party of men, Tom, Sheriff Bradford, Dr. Wright, Reverend Hayes, and Captain Morrison, all scanning the horizon for signs of Apache movement. They found them everywhere, dust clouds in the distance, the occasional glint of sunlight off metal, and always the feeling of being watched by unseen eyes. When they reached the barn, Dr. Wright immediately went to work on Nalnish. The Apache warrior was conscious but clearly in considerable pain, his fever making him alternate between lucidity and delirium. "The wound is infected," Dr. Wright announced after a careful examination. "But it's treatable. He needs rest, clean water, and time for the fever to break." "How much time?" Bradford asked. "Days, possibly a week." "We might not have days," Captain Morrison said grimly, pointing toward the eastern hills. They could see them now. Apache warriors on horseback, positioned on every ridge and hill around the valley. They sat motionless as statues, but their presence was as intimidating as a drawn sword. There had to be 300 of them, maybe more, arranged in a perfect circle around Cedar Ridge. "They're not attacking," Tom observed. "They're waiting." "For what?" Morrison asked. Nalnish stirred on his makeshift bed, his fevered eyes focusing on the white faces around him. When he spoke, his voice was weak but clear. "For my father. He comes with the morning sun. He will want to see that I am alive, and that I have been treated with honor." "And if he's not satisfied?" Bradford asked. Nalnish met the sheriff's eyes directly. "Then your town burns, and everyone in it dies. That is our way." As if summoned by his son's words, a new sound drifted across the desert air. The rhythmic beating of drums. Slow, measured, hypnotic. War drums, announcing the approach of Cochise himself. The sound sent chills down the spine of every white man present. They had until morning to prove that Tom's act of mercy deserved something other than total annihilation. In the barn, surrounded by 300 silent Apache warriors, they began to understand that the next few hours would determine not just their own fates, but the fate of every soul in Cedar Ridge. The drums continued their ominous rhythm as darkness fell, and somewhere in that darkness, the most feared Apache chief in the Southwest was riding toward a reckoning that would test the boundaries between justice and mercy, between civilization and savagery, between war and peace. The first pale light of dawn revealed a sight that would be remembered in Arizona territory for generations to come. As morning mist rose from the desert floor, it became clear that during the night, the Apache circle around Cedar Ridge had tightened. Warriors now sat their horses less than a quarter-mile from the town's outer buildings, so close that the details of their war paint were visible through a spyglass. But it was what approached from the east that made every heart in Cedar Ridge skip a beat. Cochise himself rode at the head of a column of 50 mounted warriors, their horses moving in perfect synchronization. The great Apache chief was exactly as the legends described, tall, proud, with silver-streaked hair and the bearing of a man born to command. Eagle feathers adorned his war bonnet, and his buckskin shirt was decorated with intricate beadwork that caught the early morning light. Behind him rode warriors whose names were whispered in fear around campfires across the Southwest. Geronimo, his scarred face set in lines of barely controlled fury. Naiche, Cochise's younger son, whose resemblance to Nalnish was unmistakable, and others whose reputations for warfare were legendary. In Cedar Ridge, the entire population had gathered in and around the stone church, as Sheriff Bradford had ordered. Families huddled together, children clinging to their mothers' skirts, men checking and rechecking their weapons with nervous hands. The church bells had been silent since dawn. No one wanted to make any sound that might be interpreted as a threat. Tom Mackenzie stood with Sheriff Bradford, Captain Morrison, Dr. Wright, and Reverend Hayes at the edge of town, waiting. Behind them, the wounded Nalnish sat propped against the church wall, weak but alert, his dark eyes fixed on his approaching father. "Remember," Tom said quietly, "we treat this as a diplomatic meeting. No sudden movements, no weapons drawn unless they draw first." "Easy for you to say," Morrison muttered, his hand hovering near his saber. "You're not responsible for defending 150 civilians." "None of us are defending anything if this goes wrong," Bradford replied grimly. "Against these odds, our only weapon is truth." The Apache column halted 50 yards from the group of white men. For a long moment no one moved. The silence was so complete that the stamping of a single horse seemed to echo like thunder. Then Cochise dismounted with fluid grace and walked forward alone. He moved with the controlled power of a mountain cat, his moccasined feet silent on the hard-packed earth. When he stopped, he was close enough that Tom could see the intelligence burning in his dark eyes and the network of scars that marked him as a warrior who had survived countless battles. "I am Cochise, war chief of the Chiricahua Apache," he said in accented but clear English. "I seek my son Niall, who has not returned from his scouting mission." Sheriff Bradford stepped forward, removing his hat in a gesture of respect. "Chief Cochise, I am John Bradford, Sheriff of Cedar Ridge. Your son is alive and has been receiving medical care." Cochise's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes. Relief, perhaps, though he was too disciplined to show it openly. "Show me." Dr. Wright and Reverend Hayes helped Nalnish to his feet. The young Apache warrior was pale and obviously weak, but he stood proudly as his father approached. When Cochise saw his son alive, the great chief's stoic mask slipped for just an instant, revealing the depth of a father's love and concern. "My son," Cochise said softly in Apache, then switched back to English. "You are injured." "A bullet, father. Through the shoulder. These men found me and tended my wounds." Nalnish's voice was steady despite his obvious pain. Cochise's gaze moved from his son to Tom Mackenzie. "You are the one who found him?" "Yes, sir. Yesterday afternoon. He was bleeding badly. And you chose to help him rather than leave him to die or turn him over to the soldiers?" "Yes, sir." "Why?" The question hung in the morning air like smoke. Tom was aware that his answer might determine whether Cedar Ridge survived the day. But more than that, he understood that he was being asked to explain his very soul to one of the most formidable men who had ever lived. "Because he's someone's son," Tom said simply. "And because letting another human being die when I could help would make me less than human myself." Cochise studied Tom's face for a long moment, his dark eyes seeming to look straight through to the man's heart. Behind the chief, his warriors sat motionless on their horses, waiting for a signal that could bring either peace or devastation. "You speak of humanity," Cochise said finally, "but your people have shown little humanity to mine. They steal our land, kill our children, break every treaty they make." "You're right," Tom replied, surprising everyone present with his bluntness. "And I'm sorry for that. But I can only answer for my own actions, not for every white man who ever lived. And your actions saved my son's life." "Dr. Wright saved his life. I just didn't let him die alone." For the first time, Cochise's stern expression softened slightly. He turned to Dr. Wright, who was visibly trembling but trying to maintain his professional dignity. "You are the medicine man?" Yes, Chief Cochise. I'm Dr. Samuel Wright. You treated my son well?" "I did what I could. The wound was clean, but infection had set in. With rest and proper care, he should recover fully." Cochise nodded slowly, then surprised everyone by extending his hand to Dr. Wright. The doctor stared at it for a moment before carefully shaking the offered hand. "I thank you, medicine man. A life debt has been created." The chief then turned to Reverend Hayes. "You are the holy man of this place." "I am Reverend Ezekiel Hayes, pastor of the Cedar Ridge Community Church." "Your God teaches mercy to enemies?" Hayes straightened his shoulders, drawing on decades of faith and conviction. "He teaches us to love our neighbors as ourselves. And Christ himself said that there is no greater love than to lay down one's life for a friend. Even if that friend is Apache?" "Especially then," Hayes replied firmly, "because that's when mercy means the most." A murmur ran through the Apache warriors at this exchange. Several nodded approvingly, and Tom realized that these men understood courage and honor, regardless of the color of skin it came wrapped in. Cochise turned his attention back to Tom. "Thomas Mackenzie, you have saved my son and created a debt that must be repaid, but you have also created a problem. Sir, my warriors came here expecting to find my son's body and to take revenge for his death. They are prepared for war. Some are eager for it." Cochise gestured toward his mounted fighters. "They will not understand why we do not attack a town that harbors Apache blood." Tom's heart sank. Even his good intentions might not be enough to prevent bloodshed. But then Nalnish spoke up, his voice weak but carrying clearly in the still air. "Father, these people have shown honor. The cowboy risked his life to save mine. The medicine man healed my wounds. The holy man blessed our meeting with wise words. They have proven that not all white men are our enemies. And what would you have me do, my son? Show them the same honor they have shown me. Let this be a place where Apache and white man can meet in peace." Cochise was quiet for a long time, his weathered face revealing nothing of his thoughts. Around them, 350 warriors from both sides waited for a decision that would echo through history. Finally, the great chief spoke. "For too long, our peoples have known only war. Perhaps it is time to try a different path." He looked directly at Tom. "Thomas Mackenzie, you have shown that courage and compassion can exist in a white man's heart. I will remember this." The chief raised his hand, and immediately every Apache warrior began withdrawing, moving back toward the hills with the same fluid precision they had shown in approaching. Within minutes, the immediate threat was gone, though the warriors remained visible on the distant ridgelines. "This is not the end," Cochise said to the assembled white men. "It is a beginning. My son will recover here under your protection. During that time, we will see if peace between our peoples is possible." "And if someone breaks that peace?" Sheriff Bradford asked. Cochise's smile was sharp as a knife blade. "Then they will learn why I am called the Terror of the Southwest." As the great Apache chief mounted his horse and rode back toward the hills, Tom felt a weight lift from his shoulders that he hadn't even realized he was carrying. Around him, the people of Cedar Ridge began emerging from the church, their faces showing a mixture of relief, amazement, and something that might have been hope. Over the following days, as Nalnish recovered under Dr. Wright's care and the protection of the entire town, something unprecedented began to happen. Apache and white families started meeting at the edges of town, trading goods and stories. Children, with the fearlessness of youth, began playing together despite language barriers. Tom found himself serving as an unofficial ambassador, his ranch becoming a neutral ground where both sides could meet safely. He learned Apache words and customs, while Apache warriors learned about cattle ranching and farming. When Nalnish was finally well enough to travel, 3 weeks after that tense dawn meeting, he clasped Tom's hand in the warrior's grip of friendship. "You saved more than my life, Thomas Mackenzie," the young Apache said. "You saved the honor of both our peoples. I just did what felt right. That is why it mattered." As Nalnish rode away with his father's warriors, Tom stood watching from his porch. The Arizona desert stretched endlessly before him, but it no longer seemed hostile. For the first time in years, it felt like home, not just to white settlers, but to everyone who chose to see past the color of skin to the humanity beneath. The town of Cedar Ridge would grow and prosper in the years that followed, becoming known throughout Arizona territory as a place where different peoples could meet in peace. And at the center of that legacy was a simple truth that Tom Mackenzie had proven on one fateful morning. Sometimes the greatest act of courage is simply choosing to see another person as human. The Apache warriors faded into the distance like mirages, but the memory of their presence and the peace that had emerged from the brink of war would endure for generations. In a land where violence had reigned supreme, Mercy had triumphed, and both Apache and white children would grow up knowing that their fathers had chosen honor over hatred. That evening, as Tom sat on his porch watching the sunset paint the desert in shades of gold and crimson, he could still see riders on the distant hills. But now, instead of threats, they seemed like guardians, protectors of a peace that had been bought with compassion and sealed with courage. The wounded Apache in his barn had become a bridge between worlds, and Tom Mackenzie had become the man brave enough to cross it first.